morning. Now, last week I asked you to come back and listen to my sermon this week because the story wasn't over. I promised that I would tell you what happened, how the story ended. But it seems that I've lied. Now you're probably saying that's the gimmick every time, right? They try to get us in and they disappoint. But there's one problem. You see, the story isn't over. It's still being written. But I can tell you what we missed last week. So let's give that a try. Last week, the assigned reading was from Esther. It had ended with us not knowing what happened. We were wondering, would the Jews be murdered? Would Esther intervene? Would she step up? And it turns out that she did. She was able to persuade the king not to murder the Jews, all those who had been living in Persia. And in fact, she persuaded the king to let the Jews do the murdering. They took out revenge on all those who they considered their enemies. And the story ends with the Jews celebrating their change in their fortune and the dead number in the tens of thousands. It seems to be in stark contrast to what we heard today. Isaiah writes that God is sending a servant who isn't anything like the leadership that we see at the end of Esther. You see, this leader is so gentle and loving that not even a reed is bruised or bent. Is anyone else a little confused by the two stories? I mean, if we went around murdering everyone who picked on us, it'd be a pretty empty world, wouldn't it? I mean, to make it more confusing, these two texts were most likely written during the same time period. They were contemporary writers of one another. So, I did a little digging. And it turns out that I was reading Esther wrong. Because it's not a historical account. Esther is a type of ancient Eastern literature called a novella, which according to biblical scholars was an actually pretty popular type of genre for the day. You see, they would twist the story just enough to make it sound like truth, in the same way that superhero movies now incorporate facts from our modern day lives to make us connect on some emotional or mental level and accept what we're seeing. Do you see how dangerous it can be to read a story without understanding the genre? It's as if we were reading a cooking recipe and the whole time we thought it was the front page of the news. Now, when we add this fact to what we already know about life for the Jewish community during the time that the exile happens, it all starts to add up. You see, the Jewish people already had seemed to draw the short straw. For those who refused to conform to the social standards, they were outcasts. See, the Jews have always been different. They've been viewed as outsiders, ignored. They were persecuted and abused. No wonder they wrote a story about getting even. How many times have some of us been picked on, gone home and thought about what it would be like if the tables were turned and we were the one getting revenge with that bully? The traditional theme for this week of Advent is hope. And it's something that I think the Jews in exile were trying to cling to. But then we have this beautiful poem in Isaiah 42. And I think maybe it was written to counteract those who thought that an eye for an eye would be a fair and just judgment to those who were in power and doing the picking. You see, most scholars agree that Isaiah is actually a collection of three different writers. Someone writing before, someone writing during, and someone writing after the exile. And our section today is from what they call Second Isaiah. And the writer had one heck of a tough job. How do you counsel a group of people who seem to be losing hope? Now these Jews, they wondered, does God even care? any longer. Now you might have heard, but this past Monday I crashed and totaled my car on Henry Harris Road. And since then I've gotten emails and texts and Facebook messages and face-to-face encounters with people asking me if I was okay or if I needed anything. And I can't begin to thank you guys for supporting me and for supporting Megan throughout this week. But people have also been saying something else. It's been eating at me all week. A lot of people have said that it was a good thing that God was looking out for me. Was God really doing that? And if so, why? Am I any more important than anyone else? You know, I don't really think so. Soldiers, they come home from extreme conflict and they ask these same questions. And while I'm just curious, they suffer from what we call survivor's guilt. But it's a good question. Why did I walk away from that crash? But on the very same day, a bus driver died and another one. Now, I can tell you right now that I'm no better than anyone else, and if you're Christian, you probably know that the wages of sin is death. We all fall short of the glory of God. But this week's theme is hope. So here I am hoping and wondering that God isn't a God who arbitrarily lets some of us live and some of us die. Last week I argued that we're a lot like the Jews during exile. We want revenge. We want what our distorted world thinks is actually fair. We want a God who sweeps through and crushes our enemies. But instead, Isaiah writes something that I think we need to stop and think long and hard about. Isaiah writes, "Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his teaching." You see, we forget that while we were busy imagining what it might be like for God to swoop in and help us, we've completely missed the fact that God already has been working to do just that. We don't need to go home and imagine anymore. God has revealed God's plan to all of the world in something like hope. You know, we hold our breath when we hope. It's like that dimly lit candle. We're worried that maybe we'll blow it out if we breathe too hard, and then we'll be stuck alone in the darkness. Because we're broken. We're questioning, we're worried. In fact, we don't really need a mighty warrior. We need Christ. The one who comes gently and quietly. He comes bringing justice. Jesus comes in the form of a child. I always shy away from saying Jesus because I feel like it's, Jesus, that's that southern twang, or everyone knows what you're talking about. I stick with Christ because it's that manly title, strong title. But that's not what's coming. It's an infant. Something unlike anything we've imagined. And I think that's maybe because it's only when we're confronted with something that's so precious, the life of another child, who's fully dependent on us, that we can lift our light up high and renew our hope in a God who has graciously forgiven all of us already. Amen.